platforms such as Twitter, Facebook and others are in fact data-generating platforms. Everything you do on these platforms generates a data trace. So Facebook, for instance, records which page you're looking on. It records which photos you have deleted, which photos you upload, which of the content you once produced deleted today. It is aware of the profiles you regularly visit and keeps track of them. So everything you do on either one of the social media platforms is always generating data, and the data are used for targeted advertising, for market research, but also for managing the large user numbers. So I think that the notion of user-generated content is a little bit too optimistic, as anything that we see online exists only because it is co-moderated by an entire platform that monitors whether inappropriate content is uploaded. How can they see that you are uploading nudity or violence? They often can see that in the data that is generated. If there are a lot of flags posted to an item, if there are many users are reacting in a short time to a certain post, then it often raises a flag with one of the live content moderators, and they check on it and they see, oh, there are some boobs, let's remove the content, because it's not fitting into the paradigms of Facebook. So the data are increasingly used to manage crowds, to manage users. The last thing Facebook or any other social media platform wants is that users are truly participating, because the goal is to create revenues, to have a platform that is friendly for teenagers, for families, for parents, for the general consumer. So you see that there are many data that we also can exploit as researchers. Welcome. That is the one part. We have more data available to tell something about social interaction and cultural production online. And as a media scholar, we need data to tell something about it. I was never a fan of the little surveys, the little samples, 5 people investigating, doing a so-called depth interview, which none of us is able to conduct anyway, as you need a special training for it. So my students know the term is strictly prohibited in my office. And I thought that, great, let's try to see what these data actually can tell about what users do online. It's empirical evidence, and we need to use it. Neglecting it would be bad scholarship. But there's another thing to it as well. There's a big narrative, the big data hype. We have no idea what big data is, but actually everybody's using the word. And it is a strong actor. It is shaping policy. It is affecting urban planning, the way bureaucrats think they could remodel living in a society, in a city, for instance, in a more effective and cost-efficient way. But that affects also our political perception of a city. Is living in a community, in a city, is that defined by that you can raise a flag, that there's a garbage bag on your street that needs to be picked up, or a hole in the street that needs to be filled, or that some graffiti is on a wall that needs to be removed? Or isn't the city also defined by the way citizens shape living together, having discussions about how to deal with refugees, how to deal with hate crimes in a neighborhood, to deal with the social aspects of life, care for children, care for the elderly, and so forth. And it is rather amazing that especially the neoliberal groups think it's replaceable by some mere facilitation of services. So we depoliticize public life. So there was those two things. On the one hand, we wanted to learn about data. On the other hand, we wanted to see what do these knowledge machines with our epistemic processes. How do we perceive society? And I had no idea how to teach that to students, because I've never learned that myself. So what we actually did was, we thought we need a class, we need a course, a project, how to teach our students. And we founded the Utrecht Data School. That was in the midst, it was 3 years ago, in the midst of the budget cuts, and the University of Utrecht said there's absolutely no space for any extra course or class, because The bureaucrats had the idea that each new label with a number for a course was related to costs. So we knew from the beginning, we need to cover this ourselves. As I was totally illiterate in teaching data analysis, I needed to hire someone who was. And I was faced with the costs for that. So we approached companies as the big data narrative is a strong actor. We thought maybe we can help companies to think about big data. And we were surprised by the response. From day one, we had enough participants that would fund our class. I was able to hire a principal instructor, an assistant. In the meantime, we significantly grew. We have a number of assistants now, a number of interns, and they're all paid. We do not accept unpaid internships. And it grew to a platform. We are by now a teaching and research platform. The teaching project is a two-term project. In term one, students are confronted with the basic techniques of data analysis. As we are in the humanities, most of our students are not even able to open an Excel sheet. They're really bad at math, so am I. And they had no basic training in statistics. Luckily I had, as communication studies in Austria is always related to some statistics. But not enough to teach that to students. So we had to train ourselves. The trainers had to train themselves. And we started together with the students. And it's amazing to see that students who've never opened a spreadsheet after the first 10 weeks are really able to compile a data set, to run analysis, use the filters, even learn some basic Python programming so they can run queries through larger corpora of data. In the second term, they embark together with one of our external partners, that might be a company, an NGO, or one of the governmental institutions in the Netherlands, on a hands-on applied research project. So they get an assignment and they really have to dive into it. They work at the partner's location to learn their perspective on data. As this is always an anthropological project too. We want to hear how the people are talking about data. We want to see what their hopes are they invest into data practices. And we want to see what the fears are. That is why it is so important that every meeting with a partner is actually part of a research project. And we have documents for it. We try to document all these projects and all these talks. We try to highlight what phrases they use to describe their hope for big data practices or their fears, or their skills, and so forth. And after those second 10 weeks, the students finish with a report that they present in a public symposium. They present it to the partner. Very often students get hired on the spot by our external partners, as those skills are extremely rare on the labor market at the moment. And the data school also provides an entry for companies and organizations to a group of people who have the skills that are needed right now. Next to that, we have a research platform. We call it the Datafied Society Research Platform. And that platform focuses mostly on how the narrative of big data and the emerging big data practices shape our understanding and the nature of politics. We are interested to what extent democracy is changing when we have an endless repository of everyday remarks on political affairs. Think of the endless stream of hate speech on Twitter that becomes now part of political polling. And those are phenomena we're interested in, or how television changes due to what we euphemistically call the second screen, but which also tells something about how people actually interact about certain topics that are under discussion in the mainstream media. It is also to gain research funding. Right? The teaching projects are little projects that cover our daily operation costs. But we want in the long term, we want to become a real research platform with a number of PhD students and postdocs and a real research program that delves into the biggest transformation of public administration, of public life and politics in the Western world. as we develop quite some knowledge for all these projects, we have a consulting task. So the senior staff of the data school is increasingly asked to develop insights into running policy projects, thinking with the city of Utrecht about the ethical framework of using big data practices, or consulting a bank on how could we think creatively about data. Banks are really data-driven businesses. They have data scientists that are far more superior in their skills to ours. But they still want to know, what could we do if we combine open source data analysis tools and social media data? What can we get out of it? So we help them with that, to think with them together about possible solutions. And we build a network where we presented symposia at events, we organize those workshops. We do a lot of awareness building, because the exciting thing of my job, I'm the one who has to bring in the money to keep the shop running. So the exciting part of my rather dull description of my job is that I meet people who are really angry about the things in their own organizations, how slow they develop, what problems they have, that they do not see the dangers and potentials of these big data practices. So I noticed that many people are pretty much like me, and it's really exciting to talk to them, see their perspective of a problem, and many to familiarize with. For instance, I was surprised to see so many concerned people in the security sector that are concerned about civic rights, that are concerned about the frameworks and the legal regulation in using big data that come from open sources like Twitter and Facebook, but are nevertheless unregulated in their use and monitoring practices. The people who are frustrated with the state of the IT equipment in the security sector, which is stifling their potential in getting a full picture of crime, for instance, or in pursuing criminals. These are a number of our partners, as you can see. Most of them actually come from the political world. Rathenau Institute is a technology assessment institute that advises the government in the Netherlands. Emma Communication is a consulting company that is deeply embedded into the political system in The Hague. We worked with several state departments, with the national police, with NGOs, and so forth. So what is it what we do? There are some tasks that are like more regular tasks. Social media metrics analysis is something we know it's great for students to learn about data. It is not that complicated, it's not rocket science. It is something that is not easily done, but it's something that we can manage and where we know this is a project we can actually finish. Measuring the impact of data practice is much more sophisticated, more difficult. So in any given term, we try to mix those projects. We want to have a social media metrics project where we pretty much have an idea of how the steps of executing the project work, and we want to have something about impact of data practices. And we have to take a more qualitative look on things. Data policy, also something where we need help. We need help from people who are read in law and have an idea about the impacts on organizations and regulations, policy making, and so forth. We helped, for instance, the library of the University of Utrecht to think about how could they become what the corporate world calls big data ready. And they thought they just open their data chuck and can create services that are useful. And we went there, and the innovation manager gave us the assignment, help us to use all these data for better services. And then we noticed, oh, you cannot use those data. There's someone who's actually superior to this innovation manager and can say, hey, these data are protected. We have something like academic freedom. It might be affected if you just open those data and they can be used. So we thought, okay, who's the one to speak to about the status of these data? And at the end of the project, we had no advice how to use data for better services, but we could tell them what actually the working process in their organization is to think about a new policy towards data.
So can I ask you to expand a bit more on your responsibility in ethics?
Yes, that is actually an own chapter. Ethics is a constant challenge for us. It is pretty easy to work with those tools. So in the good old days, I could say to students, hey, think about what you're going to do and start about developing some ideas, and we meet next week and discuss your ideas. I cannot do that anymore. The first assignment now is think about the ethical implications of whatever you want to do. And I haven't done that all the time. So I was called by 2 students, and they were busy for 12 hours with a project. And the thinking nowadays is just like, it's working already. So the thought experiment is the experiment. Now those 2 students were supposed to think about how to use data from a forum, from an online forum of people who suffer from a deadly disease. We wanted to know what they're doing on that forum. What kind of data could we use? Actually, we did that to learn more about what the data and what the forum provides to these people. We wanted to know what is such a forum gives to them in order to deal with their disease. Those students scraped the entire forum in one night. And once they were blocked, the IP address was blocked because you cannot use automatic scrapers. They just installed IPVanish, so they would tune into the forum from various IP addresses. So there was already something, I don't call it criminal energy, but some energy that was circumventing the thinking about ethics. And that's the reason why now we have something we had to develop, a policy of ethics. The university has no idea about these challenges. We have a little folder about Interactiva. Well, it covers only 10% of what we're doing, actually. It is something that is more or less completely useless. The only thing it tells us about is that you shouldn't commit plagiarism. But I mean, this is really not the issue here. So these students raided a forum, and I can't even say how many profiles they downloaded, because then the forum would be identifiable. It was a really large one. And I had to shut down the project, because what we were doing was contrary to the informed consent paradigm in scholarship. But it made us thinking. So informed consent is something I object to in a number of cases. I don't think it helps us. We cannot ask thousands of accounts for consent. Most of these accounts are dead accounts anyway. They were installed in one day and never visited again. So I would never get a reply. So I don't think an account in a forum equals a human subject. But that's something that is not standard practice nowadays. So we really have to develop something. Another aspect is, can I take on any commissioned research project that I'm confronted with? We work with the police, so we have to think about, what kind of data do we receive? Because it's, of course, sensitive. We have a policy developed, how to work with data that partners give us. We also have a policy developed, what kind of data do we give to the partners? We had one hackathon together with the police. There were many police people present, using the data of Project X Party in Haag. But the agreement in the beginning was we anonymize all the data, and the police has to figure out, in retrospective, how to put names to those accounts. Because it was not our task to catch some kids looting or whatever. But also, we were approached by a rather big bank, one of the biggest in Europe, and they asked us whether we could use their database of known debtors and mix it with their social media profiles to identify all their friends. Because they knew from research that a known debtor is most often a friend of someone who also will default on their debt. So they wanted to have a forecast. So if you have the wrong friends, you won't get any debt. You won't get any loan from the bank because they think you will default on the debt. So that was a project we turned down. But also, so we set some criteria. Every project we take on has to deal with our primary research interest, which is how affects data practices, politics and democracy. This is number one. Secondly, they have to accept our working conditions, which is we are not result-oriented. We are not a company, we do not give a result. What we do is an effort. Thirdly, they have to expect and to accept that our students will be learning. So the students are the center of the project. It's about the students to learn about things. And the great thing about students is they're very creative and they're very ambitious. So that's the upside. The downside is they're students, so they might be lovesick, or they might have a motivation problem, or they might have challenges to meet ends and have to put in extra hours of work, whatever. So there might be 1,000 reasons that one of the little teams we have is not finishing the project. Well, that never happened, but that is a chance. So we tell the partners, if we have bad luck, there won't be a result. But what we did is we made an effort. So that's what they are buying for. And last but not least is academic freedom. So the students have the freedom to say, well, you gave us a research question, but actually we think it's a dull one. It's not the right one. We turn it around, we provide you with a new one. And there are a number of conditions for the partner. So before we take on a partner, there's a number of meetings, like usually 3 meetings. First is an initial meeting where I tell them about what we do, it's a presentation similar to this. And second meeting is more about their problems data and more towards defining a research question. And the third meeting is really to define the ethical policies. How do we deal with data? What kind of data might be problematic? And will there be an embargo on the report? And if so, for how long? And are there some things we are not allowed to publish? And if so, for how long? And all this kind of stuff. So then we are really far advanced and can go on. So sometimes it takes a year before a partner carries out a project with us, because
yeah, one question that maybe I wasn't clear, maybe this part. And do you also question the categories that they are classifying the data, the partners?
Of course, that's a brilliant question. And that's one part the students really learn, that the data are affected by the categorization. And not only that, already by the parameters you set for collecting the data. So there's nothing like raw data, because all data were collected under some premises.
Okay. So you also question, like with the students, like these premises, so the prior to the collection of data, so maybe this is not the way to look at it.
Yes, if you can. Very often you can't, because you get a data set and no one has an idea how it actually was compiled, and you do not know what the data actually represent.
Yeah.
And that's why it is so important that the students work with a data set, that they see how messy, how fragile a data set is, and how little it might tell us about the world, or how much it might tell us about the world. So that went my computer. So.
And when does? Oh, sorry.
No.
So when does data become storytelling?
Right. Data visualization, next point. So we speak about data visualization, and data visualization might become much more powerful. Some of the nuggets, the great finds I have when I speak to external partners, I want to quote one. I met with a municipality lately, and one of the bureaucrats said, you know, we have to provide these huge reports to the politicians in the council. And they sometimes say, you know, we cannot read an 800-page report. Will you please provide us some summarizing infographics? And I think, wow, this is where we are going. So a policymaker might receive a chart with infographics and has to take a decision. That's usually the part where I show an image of, maybe I have it. Let me look up that image. That might be interesting. Let's jump between a few presentations and maybe might be more interesting than. So a few things about visualization. This one is nice to see. This is a network of mod chip retailers online. Doesn't matter what it is, a mod chip is a device for a game console, it's actually prohibited. But I used a tool that would trace the connections between all those web shops. The interesting part is that it says that Twitter is the center of the conversation. This is not true, but you only know that if you are versed enough, if you know that Twitter can't be the center of the conversation. And then you see, of course, Twitter was identified by the tool because all these web pages have a Twitter widget and therefore a link to Twitter. But that is completely unrelated to the actual discussion on or the qualitative meaning of web shops. And the most amazing visualization I find actually this one. This is an image of the Icelandic volcano, and this was an image that was used in a European boardroom to take a very costly decision, namely to ground air traffic for a week. But think about the data that we have. It's from a meteorological institute, so we know we have more than 100 years of weather data, because this is a discipline that is collecting data for a long, long time. They have stable models to develop and forecast wind directions, air pressure, temperature, and stuff like that. So, but what do we see? Some of you are artists, so I'm sure you have some training in imagery. What do we see?
What is the meaning of the green lines and the red lines?
That is the supposedly distribution of the ash cloud. Think of a cloud. This is two-dimensional. A cloud is three-dimensional. And we know that air pressure is different in each altitude. So probably the distribution of ash particles will be different too. But the data are just the weather data they had from their 100-year collection of data. This is a computer simulation about how the ash cloud could be distributed over Europe. It says nothing about the altitudes. No one has sent a weather balloon up into the air to take samples. Actually, this map does not really reflect the territory. But after a week of not flying, the companies, the air carriers, were tired some of it and said, we send our own weather balloons, their planes, to collect samples in the engine turbines. So if policymakers are increasingly taking decisions based on infographics, they need some data literacy to ask the serious question. What kind of data are here? What do we actually see? What algorithm was used for the visualization? That means we need new practices. For instance, look at this image. This image. Does anyone know what kind of algorithm might be used? Or this? Or who has a basic training in Gephi knows this was produced with the Fruchterman-Reingold algorithm, because it tends to make these circles. But we do not have the practice, and absolutely not in the humanities, of quoting the algorithm that we used for the data visualization. We have no practice of making transfer, how many steps we've taken and what kind of functions within the tools we've used. So the reproduction of this image becomes rather a challenge for anyone who wants to test our results. So there are many techniques that we still need to develop. And even worse, this is pretty much recognizable. You see a lot of dots and you see some networks. But actually we need better tools to zoom into. And still, if you zoom into, you might lose oversight. So there are new practices in working with good data visualization needed. And we do not have that yet. So one thing the data school did was we did a project for Institute of Rathenau, what I mentioned in the beginning, the Technology Assessment Institute that advises the government. And they wanted to know to what extent is an algorithm responsible for the image that you get. So with one and the same data set, simply through using different algorithms, I can receive any number of images, and any image might suggest a different story. And they look so objective, persuasively objective. Man, a computer calculated that must be true. And that is where you have to question it. For instance, we see some connections here. So the first question you have to ask is, what is the dot and what is the connection? Some indicator was there that is responsible for pointing the connection. In this case, you see each dot is an inmate in Guantanamo Bay. Each connection means that the inmate showed up in the other assessment file of another inmate. It's a co-occurrence method. So each connection shows a co-occurrence. The bigger the node, the more co-occurrences. So those guys had a lot of connections with other guys or with themselves. We do not know the quality of the connection. Might be that they were working in the same restaurant, sitting in the same cab and they were caught, or working in the same terrorist cell. We do not know about the quality of the connection, but we see that there is a connection. Interesting to us is there are a lot of dots without any connection. And so what we did, or what Rianne Toerenhout, the student who analyzed 4,000 pages of assessment files, did was simply cutting down her workload to the green dots on the outer ring that are not connected to anyone, to see what did their assessment files say about them. And then we noticed they were all harmless, rendered harmless by the US authorities. Being in the wrong time and the wrong place, ended up in Guantanamo Bay. And don't be fooled. You could represent this in a completely different way. You could represent that as a table, of course. Someone from sociology would prefer that, because this already tells a story, that there is a center, that people are cuddled together for any reason. And we do not actually know that. So, okay. So visualization is something we do, and we critically think about it. It's one of the core aspects of the data school, to teach the students to be very critical about data visualization. For instance, in the tools we use, you have buttons to do some statistical calculations. But a button indicates that that is actually a stable formula. It indicates that statistics is a field that is finished, where no discussions occur anymore. And it also stimulates certain actions. For instance, to calculate the mean average of any phenomenon is easy because there's a mean average button. So first thing you do as someone who has no idea about statistics, we click mean average, then we have the mean average. We do not know whether it says anything, but we have the possibility, so we use it. And I want the students to question what they do there and what it actually tells them, if it's needed, necessary to calculate the mean average and what it tells them. And this is some examples. I thought this is really was one of the very exciting projects because it taught us a lot about making data sets to analyzing them. The assignment was by the City of Utrecht. They wanted to know, what is the City of Utrecht on Twitter? How could you start? So you have an assignment. What is the City of Utrecht on Twitter? What do you do? I assume all of you know a little bit how Twitter is.
You look for hashtags or...
You can look for hashtags.
Geotags.
Geotags. What would be the question you ask when you want to look for geotags?
What is it?
Oh, it's Twitter allows you to send your location when you tweet. But how many people do that? Approximately 2%, 4% of all Twitter users. So the sample you receive is not really representative. So you could follow hashtags, hashtag Utrecht. Now many people living in Utrecht are not always sending a hashtag Utrecht.
Or you could focus on special events.
Yes.
Year.
And then maybe you end up with a large group of people that just travel to Utrecht for a special event.
Yeah, but the question is, what is Utrecht on Twitter? It's not, or is it the question?
It's a question, how would you find that? How would you make it a sample that is representative for Utrecht?
why was it necessary? Why was
Because the city wanted to know what are Utrecht-specific publics on Twitter and what kind of conversations are they having. How does our city look on Twitter? How can we find the local borders of Twitter?
You could also check like the names and addresses, or like the names of your citizens. You could do that.
Well, I see many Twitter names with funnycat47 or something like that. Well, if I look that up, I won't find an address.
You'll find some.
So what Thomas Boesroten and his team did here was defining big Utrecht accounts, like the University of Utrecht. Many students are following the @Uni Utrecht account. Accounts from the various clubs here, accounts of that are really related to Utrecht. And then we checked for the followers and their connections. So we ended up with an Utrecht sample of people that are related to Utrecht. Yes?
So you look for like your question like how is Utrecht institutionalized? You only look at institutionalized?
Certainly there are some institutions in it, like the university or the politics. But for instance, let's have a look on the results. We found things that we couldn't define in advance, but that's a good question. Do I confirm my hypothesis by the indicators? It was very easy to find the Utrecht social media people. Those are people that are very enthusiastic about social media. I think they're really powerful. Fun part is, we noticed they have no reach at all. They just communicate within their little bubble. Of course, we found the music and festival and culture scene. How do we find the scenes? We filter the accounts with a text mining system and calculate the words that are used to represent them. We found the local politics, pretty much similar to that echo chamber. They are also very much self-centered, but we see more overlaps from other communities. But then comes the interesting part. We had no idea who these people were. They had really no idea. Very tight community, not a real topic. They were talking about Uitgaansleben and the festivals, not about social media. So we filtered their profiles and noticed most of them live in the suburban areas. This is our Wienekswijken bubble. Those are the people in Nieuwegein, Leidsegein, and outside of Utrecht. And they are strongly connected. So I found this the most amazing part. There's one bubble you don't see because so tiny and has little connection. There's a hockey community in Utrecht that is very active. And what I found interesting, we didn't look for that, is the power of the local media. That the local media are very, very powerful. The lesson we learned from this sample was that Twitter is really a local phenomenon. So that a powerful Utrecht account that is dwarfed by one of the popular national accounts is far more stronger than the said national account within Utrecht. So here's one account, it's called Wienekswijken. She has a weblog and she's blogging about her life in suburbia. And she's really an opinion leader within Utrecht. We were also able to look at what are these people talking about. The interesting part was that the official, the institutional, propaganda is the wrong word, but the institutional communication, like for instance, from politics, they were communicating heavily about the transformation of the central station. And we could show that that is actually not carrying anywhere. So nobody took up their messages. We noticed that the political conversation were revolving around other things, like the scandal they had with the last mayor in Utrecht. That was something that people were really talking about. And local journalists were really multipliers in that conversations.
Can I ask, what is one dot? Is that a Twitter account?
Yes, one dot is a Twitter account. Good question. That's the first question you should ask. Each dot, one Twitter account. This is just a sample because we had downloaded 1.5 million tweets.
And the bigger the dot, the more tweets.
Yes, the more connections. The more connections. So that's why I'm pretty sure this is Wienekswijken. But we anonymize deliberately all the accounts.
But is every tweet, all tweets?
No, this is a follower network. This is a follower network. This is just saying who's connected to whom.
So, but everyone every tweet has its own identity, or
Yes.
everyone tweeting is in here within.
No, this is
Or
a
no,
sample
you
of
say
Utrecht.
that-
There are more Utrecht people in our sample.
Yeah,
But
but you use like they had to have say 1,000 followers at least or something.
no, we have also people with much fewer followers. And
But these
you-
are the biggest.
The more
No, this
connected
is we had a representative sample of our Utrecht collection because we couldn't use all the accounts. It was just too much to calculate. We have from each community a fair representation. It's not the biggest account. There are also small accounts, and the interesting part is that even a small account can have influence within Utrecht.
And what do you mean with influence?
The communication of that account is communicated further. So we see retweets, so we can count the retweets. We can count the ad mentions, how often someone is ad mentioned. So the data you see from Twitter is you receive from a profile the handle, like at whatever. You receive some personal information, often a website. You receive from each tweet an identification number. Each tweet has an individual identification number, so we can find each tweet in the network because the number is unique. You can download the retweets, the ad mentions, and from there you can build the networks.
I have a question. Visually, for instance, so I understand that the colors sort of represent the different groups.
Yes.
And what does it mean if, for instance, one of the black dots is somehow very far away in the regional journalistic section?
That means that
Or here?
he has more connections here,
Oh, okay.
but this is actually part of that public.
Okay.
But there's more connections there.
And was this presented to the municipality? This the results of this? I'm curious, what do they do with this now?
Oh, yes. What I wanted them to do was sending us into those neighborhoods. I wanted to do a project there and see how do these networks translate to offline networks. Can I see something about that? And can I learn about the personal motivation to build this strong online network? Where is it cost? What is the motivation of connecting heavily online? Unfortunately, they did nothing with it so far. They used it. They thought. I have no idea how this pursued further. This was for the communication department of the city of Utrecht, and we proposed follow-up research, especially since this is a political problem for the city of Utrecht. Those people are really frustrated. They feel like pioneers left alone by the city. All the initiatives of the city, building stronger, also physically strong connections with the city. Are not manifested yet, still under process. So these people they're feeling left alone. So it would be smart, I think, to look into it and learn more about them. And I think this is really one of the classic urban planning projects. You go into the neighborhood, you see what these people are doing, and so really could connect with the classic urban planning studies from the 60s and 70s. That was a question.
Yeah, I was wondering, because you talk about, you have your students be really critical and think about what the data does or what the analysis does. But you also say that like misinterpretation is easy for all these kinds of visualizations. And how do you follow up with the people that you have worked for or the partners that you have? Because now you say, I don't know what they've done with it.
This is one example where we have a lot of partners. So we try to connect with them often. What we notice is that many of them used to come to our symposium, even if the project lies back a few years, they still attend to the symposium of the current Data School edition. And most often we have follow-up projects. Very often the first initial project is something that gives them an idea what is actually possible to do. And then we have follow-up projects with what we call embedded research assistants. That is most often a graduate student that is placed at the partners and works with them for 3 months under close supervision from Data School staff. And then they carry out a different project. For instance, we did not follow up the project with the communication department of the city of Utrecht, but we have a number of projects with the guy who's in charge of helping the city of Utrecht to use big data practices. So the first project was by a larger student group just to map what is the big data landscape in the Netherlands. We found everybody in the Netherlands who claims to work with big data. But we have an address book, was the result in fact. We know where they live, we know what the companies are, and we even know which companies claim to do big data, but are actually not really experienced in it. And that is useful information for a municipality if you're looking for a partner for a certain project. The biggest problem for many big data people at the moment is that big data is like a fog. It says nothing. So you wouldn't find the party that is necessary to cooperate with. Our data set now helps them to exactly finding a partner. But the follow-up project was making interviews, finding out what do these people actually think about big data and problems and challenges. Well, we also wanted to know what the public thinks. So we had a big screening of a newspaper archive. And it's a no-brainer. Most people are afraid of privacy concerns. And if you talk to the practitioners, you see there are different concerns that even might pale out privacy concerns. For instance, access. Who has access to a data set? Who has the ownership about a data set? What is transparency in a data set? And even more important, what is analysis that is organized by a computer, an algorithm? The algorithm might be corporate property, but it might regulate whether you receive funding for your studies or not. It might regulate whether your mother will receive medical treatment or not. So algorithms might in future organize public tasks, and those algorithms might be corporate property. So we have a huge challenge here.
Who gets excluded from data?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, who gets excluded? I think there are many people who should be excluded. For instance, my health insurance company should be excluded from a number of data.
Yeah.
But at the moment, there's not a real regulation. So what I met in several municipalities is that the guy who's working with data and thinking about in many ways how to use them in a meaningful way for their community was also the one who came up with the regulation. And in the Netherlands, we are rather friendly with the corporate world, because there's a huge belief in the market. And so there might be municipalities who have no problem sharing their data sets with a marketing company, as the marketing companies have also interesting data sets that might enrich the data sets of the municipality. But here in Utrecht there are stronger concerns, so they do not do that. But the things they can do are rather scary. For instance, guys who take a data set with a record of every pupil who skips school. So what they can do is connect those data with information about the parents of said pupil. Connect that with information about social welfare programs. And they might have the correlation that social welfare programs and skipping school are somewhat related. How do they deal with privacy on that level? Well, they have privacy consultants at each municipality, and they are, of course, concerned that they might violate the privacy laws. So the privacy consultant is checking each sample whether it is large enough for anonymization. As the postcode area structure in the Netherlands goes very, very close. There are some streets that are so small that you could identify 3 or 4 families just by the postcode. So a sample that makes that possible won't be used for such sort of calculations. What they want to do with such calculations, they want to find patterns. In that case, they want to decrease the number of pupils that miss school. They want to decrease the school dropout. And they want to find a pattern. They want to see what kind of people are there that are not attending to school, and for what reason might they drop out. Yes, please.
Yeah, to elaborate on this, it almost also seems how to, for statistics, it's also not easy, but it's manageable to manipulate data in such sense that you can indeed visualize or show that there's a decreasing amount of people who are dropping out of schools or are no longer in schools, just to shift some bus codes. And at the same time, I was thinking of the which said about how if your friends are indebted, then you might not get a loan. So that there might be sort of economy existing on getting, capital friends or friends with capital without debt, in order to show your bank that you are in the right community. What are the possibilities with data manipulations for individuals or larger communities?
That's cool. There are a number already. There's one plugin for Firefox that sends out random requests to Google, so you don't have a consistent search profile. That is an example for cheating with data. But yes, I think that. But this is just a translation from elder strategies. Of course, it did help to socialize with people's outside a milieu, especially if the milieu, the social class someone was born in, is of disadvantage for career development. Well, that's always the story of the guy who uses the bathroom one floor up just to run into the management, just to be a familiar face over there. This is also a manipulation of data. But you have to think about it. There won't be a CV in a few years. No one will write a CV. And we already cheat when writing a CV. Try to pimp it, and not really cheat, but make things sound better at least. But some people cheat in a dumb way. Others are more skilled in polishing their CV. But imagine if your CV is just a download of records that are calculated somewhere. And what kind of mistakes and manipulation is possible on either side?
So, because when I asked you the question, who gets excluded from data, I was also thinking about those that maybe they don't exist anywhere, but that don't have access, that aren't online, or that aren't. So I'm thinking about how do you analyze those people, those networks, those situations where data
you mean
is
who's excluded from the representation?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I have to say that if we speak about audiences, my enthusiasm for the participatory means of technology has significantly cooled off. We have now social milieus online that haven't been representative in our representative democracies. And if I look at the current hate speech on refugees, I think it was not a bad thing to have those milieus excluded from our political decision making. But actually they're more present than ever. I think they're maybe too present, as they are now might dominate polling. You see how populism becomes the political norm. And you can say about liberal parties what you want, but if something like a liberal party is drifting that much off into right-wing populism as the FFLA did in the past years, I think that is directly related to the presence of these groups online.
Yeah, I wanted to ask also, is the post-Snowden era that we are now, that we know that these patterns could be and is a control of surveillance and control of population, is this affected in any way, like all of this, in the sense of, are we more aware that all of this data is a kind of control and surveillance? It's something that Snowden put it very clearly, but it seems that actually didn't do anything in the discussion. Like people don't care.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think it's amazing that a country like Germany, which is a really strong economy, which has quite some agency within Europe, is just accepting the fact that the secret services of the United States are massively tapping into their politicians' communication. Look, you can say about your individual privacy what you want, but what I find really appalling is that the NSA did directly tap into European politicians' communication and making that for an advantage in their geopolitical strategy, that I find much graver than any privacy violation on the individual citizen level, which is already a violation of law. But that our politicians did not react in a harsh way. But there are changes visible. There's a significant effort underway to build a European cloud. Many companies are focusing on the security of their data because they are aware of the fact that what the NSA also does is economical espionage. So companies are trying to protect themselves.
Yeah,
what we can do...
What about the citizens?
The citizens, yeah, you can do more, and many are not interested. Look, social media are in general, it's not to emancipate anyone. I mean, otherwise you don't make money from social media. It is especially to bring large audiences online who have absolutely no idea about HTML, how the internet works. Most of them have no idea that they are actually using the internet when they click in one of these beautiful interfaces. It's just to get the mainstream online.
So we talk about protocols, so could you also just give a course on being citizens of big data?
That is, okay, look, that's an interesting point. I think what we need is data literacy in school. Maybe I don't have to develop it, but this is something that needs to be implemented into school education. To what extent does it affect citizenship? But I'm afraid that many people are not interested in active citizenship. And by the way, that's also not, you can't ask of people to be well informed. You can't ask of people to be well informed. It's a real effort. It costs a lot of time. And what I see, I mean, I'm teaching for 10 years in an institution that is traditionally leaning heavily to the left and is pretty much taken by the idea that we can educate anyone to become the informed citizen that contributes to the Habermasian public sphere. But what we see now is that it is not possible. There are people that are really reluctant to get educated or resistant.
But you get teaching in school that politics is like a stage of democracy and how the division of powers is. So, I mean, of course then, if you think that's politics, it's more you should be educated earlier on the politics of data.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's something that should be implemented.
Then it sounds quite cynical to say that active citizenship costs so much effort you can't ask it from anyone. But then how do you address those people who are living in Phoenix areas, who are alienated from politics, from the community which represents Utrecht?
These are the examples that really give me, that's why I like these examples, because you see that there are people that try to self-organize, that try to develop their consciousness. I do not know, and I cannot say anything about to what extent this might translate into political action, but I see that it translates into self-organization. That's something else. Although I'm not fond of any form or of all forms of self-organization, of course.
May I point out, because we use this as an example, for example, policy action in the Phoenix, right? But it was a representation on Twitter. So I really see here that how such an image creates because you don't know if the municipality is not actually like directly, this is a Twitter connection.
Yes.
This is not a municipality connection.
Yeah, I don't even know whether they have political conversations.
Exactly, but that's what we don't know.
Yeah.
So it's like not that it isn't there.
But that's why you have to be careful with the interpretation of these images. You have always to ask, what is it actually what I see?
Yeah, so that's why I think it's funny that here the links, it gets easily made into, oh, we should all, municipality should go there because they're not doing it.
By the way, I don't even know whether they're not going there, so maybe they do.
Exactly, yeah, so it's actually, I work in a lot of projects with the municipality in that Phoenix area, so
okay.
To see.
Okay. Shall we have another question? Have you, because I know that you also work with artists also personally as a researcher. Can you tell us a bit more about, what is your role in those collaborations and how does the knowledge that you have You know, what do you do with the actors? Like what is your role there when you participate in some collaboration?
Well, what Goda is referring to is that I spent some time in Vienna at the University for Applied Arts in a lab called Artistic Technology Research Lab. And what I did was I was watching how this epistemic community, as you might call it, was developing practices. In this case, it was all kind of exploring new media in the broader sense for artistic projects. But actually, it was a trial and error process. I sat in that lab and I watched what they were doing, and sometimes I helped. Basically, the main task I had was writing grant applications, as that was the lingo I knew a little bit from university life, and because I could add some scholarly objectivity to it, and actually did convince the grant givers, and we received a huge number of grants in that brief time. But I was interested how this community would work, because for my PhD research I was looking at hacking communities, communities of hackers that were hacking video game consoles, and I was interested in how they transmit knowledge. So on the one hand I was interested in how do they develop their practices, how do they share them, how do they document them. Well, summary, it's very messy. There are no standards of documentation, there are no protocols, there are many creative ideas, and many of them get lost if some member of the lab drops out for what reason whatsoever. So it's a rather inefficient way of organizing knowledge. That's one learning I took from there. But it is a very inspiring place to be, as there flows a lot of creativity in the way of do not think about it, let's try do it. And then they end up with a prototype, and they bin the prototype if the prototype is not well enough, and develop a project further. But as the academization of the art university progresses, you see how their practices change. They now have to deliver results. They now have to finish projects. They do many cooperations with the corporate world. The group I was working with in Vienna has now received a several million grant to develop an open hardware photo camera. So they're working with a company, and they have to develop a tool. And you see how the practices change. All of a sudden there are real engineers sitting next to the artists. And what I really liked was they're playing with Bitcoin, trying to find creative uses of Bitcoin. And they did mine Bitcoin heavily at the time. And they built something that was called the Bitcoin cloud, some computer fans that were glowing, and as people were watching. So they were thinking about it. The more people are watching this installation, the more Bitcoins are mined and contributing to the value of the art piece. So I thought playing with the idea of material and audience, that was something that I found very interesting. Your colleagues.
Yeah, whenever I have these kinds of discussions, I mean, it's big data and stuff is everywhere, so you have them with your friends, and everyone seems quite skeptical. I mean, we tend to strand to look at this data, our healthcare can do this, and they can do that, and what is really interesting about your field is that you think about the ethical influences or the follow-ups of it, but I'm also wondering, like, what is there that we can say, yes, it's good to use big data in good stuff, like how can we use it in a positive sense? Yeah. Because it's really easy to say, oh, I'm worried, so let's say no, because you don't know the ethical, you don't know what's coming for some reason.
There are several parties who are explicitly looking into good uses of big data. For instance, in The Hague you have the Peace Informatics Lab, which is a group of people who are looking into employing big data for improving all kinds of processes related to peace building.
How do they do that, for example? Because that's also, you always try to, how do you interpret the data, and there's all these, it's easy to be skeptical, but how can you use them for the good? When do you say this is a good use of data?
I wouldn't know, because that's of course a definition problem, and I do not know about their current projects. They were set up a year ago or so, and they're pretty new. It's headed by Ulrich Mons, and they have a website, and they have an open day, and they even have funding for projects. So people with smart ideas can receive funding over there, and they have each day of the week they have an open day, because they invite people over to brainstorm with them. And it's a very dynamic, ambitious group, thinking about, well, it's also why they're in The Hague, it's a city. Calls itself the City of Peace, and they have all these international organizations. What we did was we teamed up with Oxfam Novib. Oxfam Novib said we have a Women, Peace and Security branch, and we want to think how can we actually empirically, with quantitative data, prove that women have a significant role in a peace building process. We know that from qualitative research that the networks of women are often keeping societies in times of war afloat, because they have to are caregivers, they have to provide care for the wounded, for children. So they have often networks that even in very precarious times help people to survive. And they are crucial for the peace building process. So there's a United Nations regulation that women have to be involved in all steps of the peace building process. And what Oxfam Novib wanted to have was data that support that. But our problem was, for instance, and there comes the big downfall, there was just not enough data sets available. We looked at Africa, and the World Bank has a number of data sets. We had just not enough data, and they were not fine-grained enough that we could build those correlations. So that you see also in a very painful way the limits of this kind of research.
But also this kind of data has been questioned a lot, because there is a lot of assumptions about women in peace and peace building processes, which actually condemns this idea of women participating in some one way, and it's this idea stereotyping women with being the peaceful ones, and then it's also already quite problematic. And actually, Oxfam Novib has been questioned jointly with the World Bank and the UN about all of these assumptions in the women and peace building.
Yeah, the only thing we could do was we could say we have no data to support that claim, but we just looked at data.
You can actually do some very simplistic data. I think if you spend half an hour figuring out how Getty works, you can download the app from Facebook and see who's your central person in your own group and send out. So if you want to organize something and want to know who needs to spread this out, to get easiest reach, it's like something you can do half an hour to figure out who is that person through this data.
And I think also a little bit this question about the big data, I think that one of the main problems is who will own this. I think if some of this data is a public good, I think this is a positive thing of collecting this data, and some kind of data could be useful, and in kind of sharing. But the problem is this public good is taken for somebody to make money. This is a problem. This is a surveillance. This is a control. Then it's this manipulation. I think
I think we really do not know enough about how to regulate the data. The problem is there's no political discussion so far. Yeah. There are very little parties that have internet issues within their programs, let alone data issues. And I think I became more worrisome about the entire open data hype, as I see what you just described, that there are municipalities investing a lot of effort to maintain data. Data really work, so you cannot just say now that the assets are open. You have to prepare them, you have to maintain them. It's really a lot of effort to make open data, or to make data open. And then you see companies tuning in and providing a tailored service for a problem within the municipality. And the municipality, which just provided at their own cost the raw material, has now to buy the surplus value, which is a surplus value, but they have to buy it at a high cost, as there are hardly any competitor who would provide a cheaper version of the same service. So it's also not a real market. So they have to buy at the one provider that is there. And you see that many bureaucrats are quite worried about that trend. They provide all this data, and then one smart entrepreneur comes and says, well, I have the solution to your problem, but they have to pay the highest price because there's no competitor.
We have the, sorry,
Yeah, so we did skip your question.
You said a few times that algorithms are like responsible for the image, and algorithms are in the future may control policy making and the way how we socially organize. But I do feel like if you see that image, I'm thinking, what about imagination? And I think isn't there where the artist comes in and maybe can affect as well how we, may perhaps transform this idea of controlling, that algorithms are controlling us. I think I find it kind of problematic to state it that way. Still, if you use these kind of images, it somehow has a feel, and artists use that, and that is presented as well to, for example, the municipality. I think then you are somehow also giving another communication about these data sets. I miss the kind of this link with, visualizing these things in another way. And I don't know if algorithms only represent these.
No, of course not.
There is another step to make.
It's even worse because look, this looks like a ugly hairball, and that's how Gephi people call those visualizations. They call them hairballs, and very often they tweak them.
Can I have one small tip?
Yeah.
I think 3 days ago I was looking at the news, and NASA has Kepler in space, and is taking pictures of other solar systems, and that data has been gathered, and they asked Dutch artists to make drawings to really visualize how these planets, because they were taking pictures of something like an Earth that was circling around the sun, but in another solar system. But they needed a human being to visualize, use their imagination to give the data that was incredible, to give it a feel, a visualization was more like fairy tale-like. It's okay, I think Earth somewhere out there is like this, based on the data she was given. They could have made it this kind of image, they looked for artists to draw it. So it's how does that fit? I think that bridge I miss in
Yeah. I have to immediately, with your last example, to think of the Earthwise, the very iconic image from the first manned mission to outer space. And they turned the image because I thought no one could imagine Earth rising to the other side. So you see the surface of the moon, and Earth has to rise behind it, like we see the sunrise. So we, of course, often manipulate images that we recognize there. That's like McLuhan said, we can only move into the future while looking into the backward mirror, because we can only speak about a horseless carriage because we have no idea what a car would be. And I think that there are the limitations, but maybe the imagination of artists might surpass that. I think what is could be the great contribution of artists. I have a huge but about that. That will fall apart. What artists could do is disrupt the normal way of things, question the way visualizations are used or data are used, play with the material in use thought experiments to measure the possibilities in aesthetic as in social interaction ways. However, the big concern is I find the target group, the audience of artists, far too small to have any significant effect on policy making.
Okay.
Because there's just too little audience interested in that aspect. I was in new media art since 1999 when I set up a new media festival in Vienna, and I noticed it's the same in Vienna, in Berlin, at the Transmediale, Deutsche Electronic Art Festival, everything the same, everywhere the same audience. Tiny audience. Really no mediation of knowledge that carries further into the debate. And then also a huge misinterpretation. I think of the great work of übermorgen.com that have been relentlessly and repeatedly misinterpreted as artists that think about emancipation of users, that are subversive. Well, if you speak with Hans and Liz, they can tell you that they really do not care what the audience thinks, and that they're really not interested in any form of emancipation. They're only interested in media constellations. That's all. They're testing media. That's all. Period. And that's what they do well. So there's the small number of audience and the problematic knowledge transfer from the artistic community to policymakers. It does not work from the academia to the policymakers as well. That is already something that's not working well. Well, that's the concern I have. I think what they're doing is interesting.
work on that. I think to say it's impossible and leave aside and let's keep working in our own discipline, I think that's problematic.
You can't say that
I understand that the communication is like almost like Chinese and Dutch. It's very difficult. Yeah, there is a lot of difficulty in understanding, but I could imagine that having a presentation for the municipality and have an artist imagine something based on that infographic, and then go to that presentation and have dialogue together with the artist. But I understand it's difficult. Perhaps there's something there. I think
there is a huge
between
design
and politics and politicians is the same.
Yeah, but I would wonder to what extent your work then would overlap with the discourse in information graphic design, which is of course a very specialized and well-developed scene, and where many publications come out at the moment discussing the nature of information visualization and how it could be improved. I mean, that's something that is as specialized as the typographic discourse.
I think this is a discussion we can have also with Rick.
I have one question.
Yeah.
I was curious because we were talking about the ethical thing, and how do you use it exactly within the big data school? Because do you want to feed the discussion as well? Like what are the ethical pros and cons within using data sets for something? Or do you just use it as a yes or no for your own?
No, it's about the discussion, and that's reflected in the way we publish. We try not only to publish in scholarly communication, which is our tiny peer group, but also we try to communicate with the practitioners. So we publish in what they call in the Netherlands vakbladen, to communicate with people who are also working with data. So e-data is one of the magazines that is focused directly on that target group. But what I really want to do is to educate my students to be in that boardroom where you see that visualization of the ash cloud, and that before the decision is made, one of my former students said, stop, we should go back and look at the data. So my objective is really to enable my students to be at those positions where data literacy is relevant in our society.
So do you, for example, the example that you gave with the bank that you declined, do you use that as do you publish that no as well? Right? What arguments you said no to feed that discussion? Or?
That is something that is not relevant to each publication, but it is something that I definitely want to include into the book I'm writing on the big data narrative. But that might also be a tiny leadership.
Okay, Mirko, thank you so much for being here.